I'll introduce you to cults. Which one you guys want to join? I'll give you a whole variety. I'm going to introduce you to cults. No, but I'm glad you're here. We are going to talk cults, and let's start off with a few passages. If you can open your Bibles to 2 Timothy chapter 4, 2 Timothy chapter 4. And sometimes I will use this verse when I'm dealing with maybe a cultic group, and they might say, we're in the Bible, we're prophesied in the Bible. And they're talking about their particular group, which is a characteristic of cults. They find themselves in the Bible in places they are not. David Koresh thought he was unlocking seals when he was locked away in Waco, Texas, and the negotiators would call on the phone, and all he wanted to talk about was how he's unlocking seals. And he thought he was doing that. Well, cults do that. But when they say that, sometimes I'll playfully say, you're right. You are in the Bible. Can I read you the section where it shows you where you're at in the Bible? And then I turn to 2 Timothy chapter 4, and I start in verse 1, and let's read it together. I charge you in the presence of God and of Jesus Christ, who is to judge the living and the dead, and by his appearing in his kingdom. Preach the word, be ready in season and out of season. Reprove, rebuke, and exhort with complete patience and teaching. So this is the older mentor, the Apostle Paul. This is his last letter that he wrote. He's about to die. He writes it to a man younger than himself, Timothy, at Ephesus, and here's what he tells him. And watch what he says here. For the time is coming when people will not endure sound teaching. Not going to put up with it. It's not what they want. They're not going to deal with it. They're not trying to have it. So if it's sound teaching, they will not endure it. But, so instead of that, what will they do? Have itching ears. So that means they want to hear something, and the false teaching is going to scratch the itch. That's how they have itching ears. Have itching ears. They will accumulate for themselves teachers to suit their own passions. So here's the felt need. Here's the desire they have. They're not enduring sound teaching, itching ears, and they stack up false teachers who will tell them what they want to hear. Remember in the Old Testament, especially in the book of Ezekiel, he would prophesy certain things. And then there was false prophets. In Jeremiah, especially Jeremiah, actually probably more than Ezekiel, but you would see this and they would say, oh, no, don't worry. This, in regards to Jeremiah, don't worry. Those guys aren't going to come and destroy us. We have the Ark of the Covenant. God is with us. I know Jeremiah is doom and gloom and telling you that we're going to get destroyed. They're not going to destroy. And that's why the Bible says they'll say peace, peace, when there is no peace, right? Because Jeremiah is saying, no, get ready to go plant gardens in Babylon. But people, what do you think was the more popular message? Don't worry, you'll be all right. Not the guy saying, no, we're going to be destroyed and be carted off. So the people stacked up to themselves these false teachers, threw Jeremiah to the dungeon, and then what do you know? Jeremiah's prophecies came true. So there's a similar situation here. But at itching ears, they will accumulate for themselves teachers to suit their own passions, and will turn away. Notice all these actions are related. Turn away from listening to the truth. They won't even listen to the truth. Forget it, endure sound teaching. They're not even trying to hear it. And wander off in the myths. So, picture, you've been at maybe the fair or the mall, and you got kids or young ones with you, and they see something bright and shiny, and they wander off. I remember one time I spent almost 40 minutes looking for one of my kids at the fair, and I found him. He was with a vendor, and the vendor felt bad for him because he lost his parents because he walked away from us, and he was sitting there eating ice cream, just as happy as could be. Well, he wandered off, and that's what he found. But when you wander off, what do you find in this case? You wander off into myths. Things that are not true. The gospel was true. Jesus died objectively. He stopped breathing. His heart stopped beating. And then on the third day he rose, and people saw not only an empty tomb, but they saw that same man alive eating fish. Meaning that was really him. It wasn't a phantasm. It wasn't a ghost. It was Jesus resurrected. Eyewitnesses, not only that, to all his miracles. This is something that happened in history. So an atheist can say, miracles are impossible. We say, but they happened. So they're not impossible. They're not impossible. But these myths people wander off, they're not true. And you wander off in them. But as for you, so this is the contrast to the man of God, to the woman of God, always be sober-minded. It's a mistake if we only think of sober-minded as don't be drunk. Obviously, being drunk can impair you, so you're not sober-minded. But it's the idea of you're thinking soberly, rightly. Your judgments and your understanding are proper, right? Sober-minded. Endure suffering. So notice, they won't endure sound teaching, but we're called not only to endure, actually accept with joy, sound teaching, but also to endure suffering. Because sometimes the people in the false religions he's talking about might persecute you. Do the work of an evangelist. We still share the gospel. We're proclaiming the good news in word or in deed, fulfilling your ministry. Yes, this is to Timothy, but yes, this is to us. And so that's one example. This is really a good description of a lot of cults. Let me show you one more from the Apostle Paul. This is in the book of Colossians. Colossians. Now, we don't know exactly what was going on in Colossae, but we do know that there was some strange teaching coming in and throwing people off. If you notice a lot of these letters, there's a problem, and Paul's got to write a letter, right, to deal with the problem. In Corinth, they're just wilding out, drinking and doing this and doing that, and just wild, no order. Got to write a letter about it. Hey, get yourselves in order. Thessalonians, Jesus already came back. That's what they thought. He must have already came. So, hey. And then the other time, they started thinking he's never coming. They were just all confused. They were fixated on end times and wrong, so he had to write 2 letters to them. Then you look at Galatians. You're turning away from the gospel because of the Judaizers. I know you're saved, but get circumcised, keep the law, then you're really saved. Jesus plus something equaling nothing, right? A problem. Even in Revelation, Jesus wrote letters to those 7 churches, remember? Hey, I hold this against you, right? So here, Colossians, there's something going on funky, and it sounds cultic. Look at this. This is in Colossians chapter 2, starting in verse 16. This is a command. This still applies to you today. Therefore, let no one pass judgment on you in question. So what's the matter? Paul's saying, don't let them judge you on this. In questions of food and drink. What? Or with regard to a festival, or a new moon, or a Sabbath. That shows we're under the new covenant. If we're strictly under the old covenant, no faithful Jew could ever say, don't let them pass judgment on you regarding a Sabbath, because in the old covenant, you broke the Sabbath, you deserve the death penalty. If you're in theocratic Israel, right, they didn't kill heathens for breaking the Sabbath, because that wasn't their thing. But notice this, new covenant rules. These, talking about the former things he just mentioned, are a shadow of the things to come. But the substance belongs to Christ. Got all these people after the shadow, but the substance is here. It's backwards. So look, let no one judge you, verse 16. Now at verse 18, let no one disqualify you. These things can disqualify you. Insisting, they like to do that, on asceticism. That's a sort of isolation of the body and denial of the body to an extreme sense. And worship of angels. So they were getting into that kind of stuff, right? Going on in detail about visions. You ever heard some of these guys? Jesus sat right down on my bed. He smelled like vanilla. And he said to me, this is stuff I've really heard, by the way. He said to me with a raspy voice, detail about something that had never happened. Going on in detail about visions, right? Puffed up without reason, all arrogant, but you got no reason. You're making this stuff up, man. By his sensuous mind. Joseph Smith gets a revelation. I think we can have multiple wives. That sounds like, right? And not holding fast to the head, so they're disassociated from Christ, from whom the whole body, nourished and knit together through its joints and ligaments, grows with a growth that is from God. Continuing on, because this is stuff cults do. If with Christ you died, that's us, to the elemental spirits of the world. Question about what that means. There's some debate. It could be sort of the base elements of life, of reality. And I think there's an element to that. You've kind of died to the natural way things are as a Christian. But, I mean, natural in the fallen state, the sinful state is what I mean by that. But also perhaps even the powers behind wickedness in a sense. Demons, right? What does the Bible talk about? Idols are demons. I think it means both here, but it's an interesting phraseology, right? Elemental spirits of the world. Why? So saying, if that's the case, why are you doing this? Why, as if you were still alive in the world, do you submit to regulations? He's saying you're acting like your dead self. You see that? And notice how he asks him a question. If that's the case for you, why are you doing that? Do not handle, do not taste, do not touch. My goodness, I saw the silliest video an atheist friend of mine sent me today. He said, look at this. It's a battle of street preachers. So I clicked on. I was like, is this going to be like bum fights except two street preachers fighting? Is that what this is going to be? So I clicked it on, and one guy was saying the other guy wasn't doing it nice enough, and they're on the microphone, and at the end, the kind of nicer guy says to the other guy who's more cantankerous, well, brother, that's okay. Let's just hug it out. And the other street preacher goes, touch not the unclean thing. We'll give him a hug. Only Christians can insult you like that, right? Touch not. I was like, man, I think he was misapplying the verse there. Touch not the unclean thing. Do not handle, do not taste, do not touch, referring to things that are all perish as they are used according to human precepts and teachings. And we are going to talk a little bit about the Hebrew Israelites today at some point. It's interesting because when they bring out a verse, they'll call it a precept. And you can say, that's right, my friend, that is a precept, but it's according to a human precept. Colossians chapter 2, verse 22. These have indeed an appearance of wisdom. Those brothers are real wise over there. Yeah, they got a lot of wisdom, an appearance of wisdom. I'm sure David Koresh seemed really wise to his followers, the Branch Davidians. In promoting self-made religion and asceticism and severity to the body. My goodness. You know, Roman Catholics still have within their tradition an element called flagellation where they beat themselves. Now, I'm not saying all Catholics do this, but it's an element. For example, some of the monks will wear these barbed wires around their thigh. So they're constantly feeling the pain to kind of punish their flesh and to bear what Christ bore. Or Da Vinci Code was a crazy lie of a movie. But they showed the guy beating himself on the back like that. Silas, I don't know if you remember that, things like that. People be doing stuff like that, yeah. Yeah, actually there's videos you can watch of people in the Philippines that crucify themselves. These are Catholic Christians in the Philippines. They crucify themselves. But they come off the cross so they don't kill themselves to death. People do die sometimes. But you can watch videos, just put Philippines crucifixion and woo, not safe for work. But they are of no value in stopping the indulgence of the flesh. That's not it, fam. That's not the business. It doesn't even work in killing your lust and your sin. That's what cults are, though. It's a false promise. It's empty. So when we talk about cults, the question is, what is a cult? So I'm going to transition. We're going to pick the Bible back up, but I'm going to start there so we have a framework. And we're going to get into something, and it's going to be a little technical, but I'll try to make it easy. So before we go into that, we're going to start talking about what is a cult. I'm going to tell you some definitions, some important things. I want to stop there and allow time. I'll do it at the end too, but questions on anything we talked about so far. You can, any question or any comment, go ahead. You got it. We can do this every now and then. Anything you got for me? I don't know. It's live right now on his thing. I don't know if can people re-watch it?
Do you have a YouTube channel?
I do. YouTube.com/Vocab Malone. I don't know if I'm putting this up, though, but I might.
Do you have stuff like this?
You know what's funny? What we're going to talk about at the end, Hebrew Israelites, yes. But what we're doing right now, I've actually never got into, like, defining cults, and I've never done that. This first time, bro. First time. So, yeah, Mike, yeah. Which means I don't know what I'm doing. So, hey. But let's take a look at this here. Now, having books doesn't mean anything, but if you've read some of them and understand them, maybe it means a little something, right? So I got some books here I'm going to be drawing from. Know the Marks of a Cult. Got the serpent on the cover. Can't beat that.
Camera two.
Oh, yeah. Hey, camera 2.
That's right.
Tonight, I'm not really referencing this one too much, but it's a decent little one, very easy. In fact, they've set it up like you could do like a Bible study, 13 lessons on this one. This one we are going to reference at the end because it deals with hermeneutics. Scripture Twisting by James Sire. 20 ways the cults misread the Bible. We probably won't be able to define all the things in here, but that'll be a fun little section. And then we might get into this one a little bit. Abanus. Cults, Religious Movements, and Your Family. He has some good stuff in here. A Guide to 10 Non-Christian Groups out to Convert Your Loved Ones. And then Ron Rhodes, Handbook on Cults and New Religions. He does great work. All of his books are really good. He does a lot of books on Jehovah's Witnesses as well. But one of the main ones I'll be looking at is former professor at Talbot, Alan Gomes, Unmasking the Cults. Got some good stuff in there. What, you want to do it here this way now? Extend it out like the... feel like Vanna White. Okay, now, maybe we'll talk about those again later, but for now, it's time to look at the iPad, and let's do a little something here. You can define a cult sociologically or theologically. Now, there's some overlap there, but those are the main ways people do it. So I'm going to explain a little bit more what I mean here because we're going to define some terms. This will be helpful for you to be able to process these things when you think about them. Sociologically is usually how secular researchers tend to do it, because you can define a cult sociologically and merely describe practices without really making a value judgment. You might just say, this group broke off from that group, but you're not really commenting on right or wrong in a lot of instances. This is often considered the way to kind of do it at the academy or the university. It's more in sociological terms. That way you don't make any judgment of morality about the issues. So even the word cult is a little passé. Common people use it. We use it, and it's fine. We're going to use it tonight. But just know that people in the higher ups tend to not like the word cult as much anymore. And there's a few reasons for that, some of which are valid. But we're not really going to be defining cult sociologically here tonight. We're going to really be defining it more theologically. Theologically. That's more how we're going to define it. And so I'm going to draw from Gomes' book here. This is kind of a long definition, so I don't know if everybody will write all this, but you'll get the basic idea. Quote, theologically, a cult is a religious group that derives from a parent religion, such as Christianity, but in fact departs from that parent religion by denying, explicitly or implicitly, one or more of the essential doctrines of that religion. And my definition there is from page... You want those? Oh, yeah, thanks. I might need to... Yeah, page 7 is where I got that from. So this is... That's Ron Rhodes' definition, actually, from page 8. But I'm going to read another definition, then I'm going to explain them a little bit more. This one's similar. A cult of Christianity is a group of people who claim to be Christian, yet embrace a particular doctrinal system taught by an individual leader, group of leaders, or organization, which systematically denies, either explicitly or implicitly, one or more of the central doctrines of the Christian faith as taught in the 66 books of the Bible, end quote. So, I'll explain this a little bit here. When you say cult, it can get tricky really fast. Specifically tonight, we're going to be talking about cults of Christianity. We don't like the term Christian cult, even though you could say that, because there could be some confusion in what you're saying if you say Christian cult. So when we say a cult of Christianity, what we mean is an organization that in some way claims that they've got the right reading on the Bible, but then they deny the fundamentals of the Christian faith. There's cults of Islam. So to be precise, we wouldn't call it an Islamic cult, but we would say a cult of Islam. So here's mainstream Islam, and there's this faction or breakaway that denies key elements of it. For example, Islam is this big thing, started in the 7th century by a not-so-nice guy named Muhammad. And years later, Elijah Muhammad came in Detroit, after Fard and said, actually, here's the right version of this. Here's the way to read the Bible. Here's the way to read the Quran. And Fard said, I'm Allah manifested in the flesh, which is something a faithful Muslim could never abide by, Allah being manifested in the flesh, which is part of the reason why they have a problem with the incarnation, because it's God incarnate. So the Nation of Islam, that's Farrakhan, that was Malcolm X before his assassination, right? That would be a cult of Islam. You see what I'm saying? It's not a cult of Christianity in a proper sense, but you see, the thing is, sometimes these groups will claim to be multiple things. They'll claim to be a Christian group too, but you kind of look at their foundation. So the best way to describe them would be that. Jehovah's Witnesses, on the other hand, it'd be best to understand them as a cult of Christianity, because they're saying the true Bible understanding, the true biblical understanding was lost, and now it's been brought back in these end times. The original name of Jehovah's Witnesses actually was International Bible Students. And then they changed their name in Columbus, Ohio, I think in the year 1930, because they said, you're Jehovah's Witnesses, which comes out of Isaiah. You're the witnesses for Jehovah, Jehovah's Witnesses, right? And so they're like saying this is the real understanding. Mormons, they claim the gospel was lost with the death of the last apostle, basically. And now in the last days, through a vision, it's been restored to Joseph Smith, and then he passes it on. A key element that they say was lost was the priesthood. So Joseph Smith got laid on hands basically by personages he said he saw, and now Mormons still lay hands on each other to continue on this priesthood. So they believe they have the keys. So they're restoring something that was lost. They would say that's the real Christianity, right? So those are cults of Christianity. It would be imprecise to say Mormonism, for example, was a cult of Islam, because it doesn't have anything to do with it. Now, some people say, well, you can define any world religion or religion as a cult. And I guess that's true in a way. For example, when Christianity first came about, a lot of the Romans who were like, what is this thing? They viewed it as almost a cult of Judaism. So there's a kind of a joke like, what's the difference between a world religion and a cult? Time and numbers. You know, once it's older, it's got more people, then you're like, well, that's now meets the criteria of a world religion. Now, look, we're talking about these definitions, but here's the thing. Biblically speaking, you're a son or daughter in Christ or a son or daughter in Adam. So we understand there's labels in the sense of you're part of this, you adhere to this, adhere to that. But ultimately, you're either in Christ or not in Christ. So a Muslim, they would say to a Christian, you're a kafir. If they want to be rude, they're saying you're an infidel. Now, some will say you're a people of the book. You just got some things wrong. Depends how they view it, right? But we understand the Muslim's not a believer, because a believer is not just someone who believes. I mean, by that definition, everyone's a believer. When the Bible talks about a believer, it's someone who believes in the finished work of Christ. There's a definition to it. There's something to it. The gospel, right? Now, going back to this, we understand the Academy likes these value-neutral terms, so they don't use cult. They'll sometimes say new religions, new religious movements, alternative religions, alternative groups, alternative faiths, emergent religions, alternative spirituality, something like that. But we're defining it theologically within the Christian spectrum is mainly what we're going to be talking about tonight. Now, some of these groups will say, well, we don't like to call ourselves Christian, but where they broke off from was a Christian church. Not only that, what they're saying they're doing is interpreting the same canon often the way. And if you talk to them, a lot of them will say, well, yeah, we're the true Christians. For example, a lot of Hebrewites, when you talk to them, they'll say, well, we don't call ourselves Christian. We call ourselves Yehudim or something like that. But they'll say, but actually, we're the real Christians, if they accept the New Testament, that is, because not all Hebrewites accept the New Testament. But they don't tend to like that terminology usually, although some groups do. For example, Israel of God. Israel of God is over there, last I knew, on 44th Street in McDowell or around there, around that area. Maybe it's a little more west, but right there in McDowell. And I visited them before. And, they don't stand on the street corners. They're still not right, but they'll say, yeah, we're like the real Christians, and they'll call us Sunday Christians. It's kind of a slur to them. Sunday Christian to an Israel of God member means someone who's ignorant and probably pretty lawless, right? That's kind of the way they look at it. But back to this, it's claiming to interpret the Bible properly or be Christian, but then denying the fundamental tenets of it. So let's talk about some related words here. Occult. People sometimes make the mistake where they say, oh, that's an occult. OCCULT is a different word than CULT. Occult has to do with spiritism, has to do with things like some of the accessories you might think of are tarot cards, Ouija boards, fortune telling, magic, stuff like that. That's the occult, which means something hidden. That's what occult means. It means something not revealed, something hidden. Cult is different. Now, doesn't mean one's right just because the name's different, but it's just like, understand. So Jehovah's Witnesses are not a cultic, whereas, for example, if you're part of the Church of Satan, that's a cultic. You see what I'm saying? But Jehovah's Witnesses, I think we can say, are a cult. So just something to understand there. Another related word is heresy. Heresy, in its etymology, means the thing chosen or something that's chosen. It really just means a division. Now, this gets tricky. Again, the word heresy, and then calling someone a heretic and saying something is heretical. Here's why. Is anything that we believe meet the criteria of heresy if we're wrong on it? For example, let's say you're a Christian and you have this view and you find out later you were wrong about that view. Were you a heretic prior to that? Now, if it was something like denial of the Trinity or something, maybe so, but you can also just be wrong without, I think, rising to the level of heretic. So something can be what's called unorthodox or heterodox, meaning it's different than what it should be, but it doesn't rise to the level of heresy. Then some people even go further and say there's heresy, which is a very serious error on the person's part, but they'll distinguish that from damnable heresy, meaning something that is egregious enough that would have to mean this person is not a believer. Like Paul was saying to the Judaizers, that's damnable heresy, what they were trying to put on the Galatians, for example. You know, the fact that they were adding the law unto Christ. He viewed that as damnable heresy. That's why he said, go ahead and cut yourselves off all the way. That's damnable heresy. In fact, he used the word anathema in the Greek, where it says in Galatians, let him be accursed, let him be accursed. That's anathema. Now, the problem is these words have historical baggage. So let's talk about history for just a second. Because sometimes people talk about, Christianity is just a power play to get people to do this and that. Well, during the Inquisition, to be called a heretic by Roman Catholic authorities was a very serious thing because they could hand you over to the state, and usually the Roman Catholic leaders were in league with, especially when you talk about Europe, in league with these powers, and they would do things like torture you or put you on the rack until you confess, and then sometimes they still might burn you or do whatever. So being a heretic was a punishable offense, for example. We're not saying heretics should be killed. We're not in a theocracy. We're not thinking that's right. We're not saying heretic, therefore we should kill you. We're just saying you're making a serious error in your theology. But understand sometimes these things have these weighted things because of that. Then same thing with saying heresy and those kinds of things. You know, there can be baggage with it. But that's not what we're talking about. Same thing with anathema. The Reformation happened by God's grace, sparked it off. It was a restoration of the gospel, not saying those people were perfect or anything like that. But when that happened, Rome had something called the Counter-Reformation. And in the Roman Catholic Counter-Reformation, they had something called the Council of Trent, which was a council where they got together and said, here's all the things the Protestants are doing that are wrong, and we damn them. So they would say, if somebody says they're saved by faith alone, let them be anathema, which means the Roman Catholic Church is saying you're condemned to hell. That's what it's saying. So anathema is a biblical word, but it's ironic that the very thing that we're preaching out of Galatians, which is salvation by grace through faith alone, they condemn as anathema in that same letter, because that's where Paul uses the word anathema, which means be accursed or be damned. And they're saying the real gospel is anathema. That's why I love my Roman Catholic friends, but there's heavy problems in the history because that's not something that's been discounted. The Council of Trent is still binding for Rome. Anathema, right? That's a problem. So occult, heresy related to heretic or heretical, right? Or sect. This is like a faction, or sometimes they'll say party. They don't mean party like rah-rah. They mean party like a group, kind of like the Republican or Democratic Party, or a school of thought. Now, something can be a sect and not necessarily rise to the level of cult. And the reason why I'm doing all this, is just to help people to start thinking through these things and the way terminology is used, because we can make the mistake of labeling nothing a cult, or we can make the mistake sometimes of labeling everybody cult and using the word improperly. So we're trying to think about how we use words, because definitions matter, words matter, and so we're trying to use them the right way, right? Now, at the end of the day, definitions only take us so far. We got to discuss the actual details of the situation on the ground, but this is setting a foundation from how we discuss this stuff. Now, within that, I'm going to discuss right now common theological characteristics, which are really common theological errors of cults. They tend to have similar things that they do wrong. Not every cult will do all the things, right? And there's sometimes Christians will do some of the things, but it's kind of like these are the common things that we're going to look at. Before I do that, I'm going to stop, take a breather. Any questions about anything I said so far in regards to those definitions? Go ahead. No, that's good. You don't got to, go ahead. Heterodox. Heterodox. So ortho means straight. You go to the orthodontist, he fixes your teeth straight, right? Orthodox, that's like thinking or practice. Ortho is like straight or right thinking. So when someone says orthodox with a lowercase o, not as in the Greek Orthodox or the Russian Orthodox, that's a capital O, lowercase o, they're saying in alignment with proper Christian doctrine. So orthodox would be right Christian doctrine. Heterodox is something that maybe is aberrant or off or incorrect, but it doesn't equal heresy. So this is important because we want to have grace towards Christians. Christians are going to disagree. We're different denominations, different personalities. We're all in different stages. And we can't go around calling all Christians heretics and everyone's church is a cult. Now, there are some churches that are really ultimately cults, or there's some churches that maybe aren't healthy, so they're cultic or cultish. You see what I'm saying? And then this doesn't answer a question about any individual person. A person may be in a cult, but that was the first thing they came to, and they had a genuine born-again experience. They're for real saved, but it takes them 3 years to realize, well, I'm in a cult. I'm not in the real thing, and they get out, right? So there's an individual, but it's this understanding of the larger thing. But heterodox is... So these terms come out of sort of like the history of theology. So it's terms that you could have at your disposal, because when you start getting into the details of something, precision of language becomes important. So that's why we're sharing these. You may not use them every day, but even if you don't remember the word, it helps you to think in tighter categories, right? So I love the questions. Keep them coming. Now let's look at some common theological characteristics, which are really errors of cults. Mikey? Unorthodox. Bless you. I think usually the way it's used is like this. Orthodox is the best. Unorthodox is like... Unorthodox and heterodox are somewhat similar. Some people would say one is sort of worse than the other, but a lot of times someone might say unorthodox to say something that is cultic, but it's just a kind of a fancy way to say you're wrong or it's out of step. But the question is, does it deviate on an important doctrine or does it deviate too far? And that's where Christians, they have debates about it. So heterodox and unorthodox kind of get used interchangeably, but I don't think they really are. But I don't know. I think unorthodox is, I think, worse than heterodox. Well, so the Christian who believes that, continuationist, meaning someone who believes in charismatic gifts today, that they're out of step, they would say they would say they're the unorthodox ones or the heterodox ones. Then the Christian who believes in gifts for the modern era, they would say to the cessationist, the person who believes God doesn't move that anyway, they might say they're the heterodox and unorthodox ones. So the question is, that's where these questions are, which one is right. Now, in the case of that, what's called continuationism versus cessationism just means, are the miraculous gifts operative in a normative way today, or are they not? It's not atheist. It's not like an atheist who's saying no miracles can happen. The cessationist position is God is not moving that way now, basically. The continuationist position is that he is, and there's variations between that. So within that, I don't think any of those are heresy or any of that, you know what I'm saying? But see, people, that's the thing. If people don't know what's the big things, the main things, then they'll make the smaller. And saying it's small doesn't mean it's not important. It's just saying it's not as big as the bigger thing. They'll make them sources of division or, well, you're a heretic. I think we're allowed to divide over stuff like that because it'd be hard to practice if one person believes you can speak in tongues during church with interpretation, other one doesn't. It'd be hard to have a church together. But that doesn't mean you're saying that person's not a Christian, I hope. You see what I'm saying? So we see through a glass darkly lit. So some of these things are still working out, but everything's not that way, meaning everything's not as debatable. Now, I believe we should have certain views as we go throughout it, but it's like we got to understand the level of sort of like a hierarchy of importance. Not believing in tongues for today is different than saying Jesus is not God. One's a bigger error. You see what I'm saying? And so you want to be charitable, so we don't want to call everyone cults and heretics, you know that, right? But we also don't want to not take any stands or draw any lines. It's not an easy balance all the time. So let's talk about some common characteristics of cults. These are things that they tend to deny, devalue, or reinterpret. So there's outright denial, but then there's also sometimes just devaluation. For example, the resurrection. This is an example. I'm going to give you an example of devaluing something. The resurrection, my goodness, is that not the centerpiece of the gospel? We preach Christ crucified, and that's because he's rose again from the dead. Paul defines the gospel in 1 Corinthians 15. It's centered on the resurrection, right? This is the thing, man. Jesus rose from the dead. Absolutely essential. And a denial of the resurrection is heresy. But then there's groups that devalue it. So I'm going to use the Israelites as an example. I've used Jehovah's Witnesses. I've used Mormons. I've used Catholics. I'm going to use them too. Try to find a teaching on a Hebrew Israelite channel about the doctrine of the resurrection. Almost impossible. The central cardinal doctrine of the gospel is absent from their statements of faith, their websites, their videos, their street preaching, their books, some of which I have. Hebrew Israelites, they never talk about the resurrection of Jesus Christ. If they believe that he rose from the dead, they don't even do it. I was talking to one Hebrew Israelite, a guy he's a nice guy, but I said, do you believe that the resurrection happened in history, that Jesus bodily rose from the dead? And this is a guy considered a leader who actually gets invited to speak at churches, which he should not be, but he's able to sneak in there. And this guy said, I'm agnostic on the resurrection. You can't be a follower of Christ and be agnostic on the resurrection. But that is because within Hebrew Israelism, the most important thing is not that Jesus rose from the dead. The most important thing is I'm an Israelite and God is with me and not so much with those other people. It's a replacement of the gospel. A devaluing of the resurrection comes along with it. The devaluing is less clear because someone can have a wrong emphasis, like these folks that all they talk about is the end times. They may believe in the resurrection, but you ain't ever talking about the resurrection, man. Where's the resurrection at, right? So devaluing, it depends what else is going on. This is like picture a spectrum, picture, a mesh or a grid, and there's multiple considerations. But you can't, how are you a disciple of Christ and you don't have nothing about the resurrection? Because the gospel's not even really important to you. That's really why. I asked a Hebrew Israelite leader, I said, brother, I went to your website today and I looked at it and you have your statements of faith. You have no holidays, no birthdays, no Christmas. You have keep the law. Why don't you have anything on there about what the gospel is? He's like, well, yeah, I know that's not on there. And this is one of the big groups. This is not a small little podunk one. He said, we kind of assume that. I was like, what do you mean you assume? He's like, well, we figure, most of our people come out of the Christian churches and they already know the gospel. I was like, so you're saying the most important thing they've already been taught, but you don't have it on your website. Help me out. That might be an oversight. This is a guy who's a little friendlier than some of the other ones. I'll look into it. And I'll bring it, because he was in leadership, I'll bring it before the committee, and we're going to try to add that entry. That was 4 years ago. The gospel is still not on the main website. It's not there, because it's not very important. That's a devaluing of the gospel, which kind of makes you wonder, do you believe it? Gospel's life-saving, life-changing message, my goodness. So devalue or reinterpretation. Some Hebrew Israelites, not all, some Hebrew Israelites believe in reincarnation. The ones who do take passages where the Bible talks about regeneration and interpret them as reincarnation. What is regeneration? Regeneration, because generate, born or made, again. It means born again. Regeneration is born again, that doctrine, right? It doesn't mean to be reanimated in a new body. But they'll say, reincarnation or regeneration. Well, no, those are not the same thing. Right. Don't look at regeneration every time and tell me that means reincarnation. Well, regeneration means to be born again in your heart. Reincarnation, sometimes they'll even use resurrection to try to do it. But they view reincarnation. Let me give you an example. So this is a very real example. Out here on Indian School in 27, sometimes you'll see IUIC. They wear purple and gold, right? You already know they're bad because they got Lakers colors. Anyone that wears Lakers colors can't be good, right? Just kidding. Not really. So those guys, leaders named Nathaniel. Nathaniel came out of a school that was in Harlem. And that school, they started teaching reincarnation. It was at 1 West 125th Street in Harlem, New York. So Nathaniel, who leads, and now he has chapters all over. He's not in Phoenix. He's still in New York. But those guys, purple and gold, follow his orders. Literally follows. They're called soldiers and troopers and captains, right? And officers. They have ranks. So they are taught by Nathaniel because it's required to sit in 2 or 3 hours of IUIC in the class every Saturday. So if you wonder why they pack up and leave, it's because they got to go to class and they have to be in there all day. So I'm getting to a point. Just hold on. I'm saying little things along the way in regards to Israel United in Christ. That's the name of the group I'm talking about. Nate was taught by men with the names of Yaquab, Mashah, Ariah, and some other men, right? Those men started teaching reincarnation to the school before it split up because IUIC is now a descendant of the splits of that school. It happened in the 90s. They taught him reincarnation, and guess what? They said, well, if reincarnation's true, maybe we can look at our leadership and figure out who you are. So let's look at this guy's characteristics. Well, and so they started talking about each other's characteristics, and they started assigning leadership, people from the Bible. So Mashah was assigned as King David. And in the school that Nathaniel, who leads the purple and gold guys, in that school, they made them sign a loyalty oath to King David. Now, this is all the way back in the 90s I'm telling you about. Because why? They're the nation of Israel. Who's in charge of Israel? King David. Well, Mashah is King David. So they sign a loyalty. And when he split off from the main school, guess what he called his school? The House of David. What? Mike, what you doing, bro? So that wasn't the only guy. They started assigning people in the Bible. Jesus is the reincarnation of Adam and Solomon. Think about this. Jesus has in him, I don't know how to describe it, the guy who's responsible for the downfall of humanity and the one who's responsible for the split of Israel. That's Jesus. So guess what? Some of these groups teach when Jesus died, he had to first pay for his own sin because he's reincarnated Adam. And so if you don't believe me, you talk to the... Now, remember I mentioned Israel of God earlier? This is where I know I don't want to lose you. Remember I mentioned Israel of God? They do not believe in reincarnation. So I need to reemphasize, just like all Christian groups do not believe the same thing, all Hebrew Israelite groups do not believe the same thing, so you got to ask questions. I'm telling you who does and who doesn't specifically. Israel of God, and I'm giving you real-life examples. This is concrete. On McDowell, they're not Christians. They're nice, but they're Jehovah's Witnesses are nice, right, usually, till the end when they get mad at you and tell you you're going to burn. Or, well, not burn, be annihilated after you get judged by nuclear warfare. Anyways, if you've ever had these conversations with them, they do not believe in reincarnation over there in McDowell, Israel of God. IUIC, which last I knew was on 19th Avenue in Dunlap. I don't know where they went now, but I know they preach out here on 27th and Indian School. They do believe in reincarnation. So if you want to have a conversation, you say, is it true that at the old school, you guys taught that Mashah was King David and that Nate had to take a pledge of loyalty to him? Now, you're talking to some guy who's only been there 2 years, he may not even know what you're talking about. But these groups have a lot of times rotten fruit because they have rotten cores, rotten roots, you know what I'm saying? So there's a redefinition that is very frequent with theological terms, right? For example, the Mormons define grace as God's gift to you after you've done all you can do. So it's like you're working for your salvation. God's like, okay, you got 90%, I got the last 10. But it's grace alone. It's all a gift. So they'll say, I'm saved by grace. You start talking about their grace. It's really just God giving you merit for your efforts and making up, the part you couldn't get, as opposed to Jesus saying it's finished. See what I'm saying? Redefinition of terms. That's why you got to say, I hear you. What do you mean by that? So when you talk to a person of another worldview, don't lecture them. You're not John F. Kennedy with speechwriters. Some of us love to hear ourselves talk. Ask them questions. What do you mean by that term you use? Help me out. You don't got to be all crazy and funny. What do you mean? Just ask them, what do you mean? Where did you get that from? Help me. Can you re-explain that? That is so important in these discussions, is to ask questions, is to ask good questions. Now, here's some common characteristics. What? Yeah. Yeah, well, that's dealing with the cults will help you develop the fruit of long suffering. Hopefully. Okay, so here's what they commonly deny or devalue or reinterpret: the Trinity. Find me a cultic group who believes in the Trinity. They still may be a cult, but it's a needle in a haystack. Everybody denies the Trinity. Everybody denies the Trinity. Mormons will say, well, yeah, we believe in Father, Son, and Spirit. And you say, yeah, but you believe that Father had a father before him and he had a father before him. You believe there's a lineage of gods. So your Trinity is 3 gods within an infinite number of gods. That's not the Trinity. That's 3 gods out of 100 million. You see what I'm saying? This is what Mormons really believe. So a lot of times you say, I believe in the Trinity. You gotta be a little more investigative. They deny sola fide. That means by faith alone. Roman Catholics, I'm not saying they're a cult. I'm just saying it's a false world religion in a sense as far as the official documents go. Sola fide is faith alone in Latin. Roman Catholics will say, yeah, you got to have faith to be saved. Duh. It's the alone. The alone is the key element. The alone, that's how we are saved. Or sola gratia, which means grace alone. Ephesians 2:8-9, right? Saved by grace through faith, not your own doing. That's exactly what Ephesians 2:8-9 says. These groups deny that it's grace alone. They deny that, right? They devalue the cross. For example, IUIC says, yes, Jesus did away with the law of sacrifice. So every time when the Bible says something about the law in relationship to the cross, they literally add the parenthetical statement of sacrifice. What does that mean? We don't have to give sacrifices anymore because Jesus was sacrificed. But everything else you got to keep. So the only thing he really did away with was the law of sacrifice. And they'll say sometimes the punishments, which mean we don't have to stone people for doing bad stuff anymore. But that's devaluing of the cross, right? He's not paying for sin. He's paying for one thing that you don't have to do anymore. Or sometimes other groups will say he died to reset or reestablish the covenant with Israel. So a lot of the Hebrew Israelites, for example, don't like the term new covenant. We are in the new covenant. Jesus literally said we're in the new covenant. They like the term renewed covenant, but renew and new in Greek are 2 different words. And he said new covenant. We're in the new covenant, not a renewed covenant. Renewed covenant is just the old covenant renewed. But Hebrews says there's a new covenant that's superior to the old covenant. And he even says the old covenant's obsolete and passing away. The Bible says this in Hebrews. My point, got to watch out for that stuff because they'll deny or devalue, in this case, the work of the cross. Deny or devalue or reinterpret the resurrection is another common thing we talked about. Or we talked about redefining biblical terms already, so to watch out for that. And also hyper-exclusive. That's another characteristic. So there's a group called GMS. They meet down there. Mike, where did that group meet? Is he still in here? What's he doing? We found out their address the other day. Anyways, they're downtown like Monroe and First Street. I was just wondering where GMS met. These are groups in Arizona is what I'm telling you. GMS, in regards to this, they say they teach 100% truth. Because if you say, wait, 100% truth, they'll say, well, why else would we teach it if we didn't think it was true? So they literally say, where's GMS meet downtown? Where was that? Was it? Yeah. So every Saturday you can find them and ask them, Do you teach 100% truth? They'll say, yes, our leaders teach 100% truth. And that's where they are. And by the way, they think their leader, Tahar, is the reincarnation of Paul. But he says he knows more than Paul because he's Paul reincarnated. And so they kind of learn more around this time around, right? So then when they know more than Paul. Thank you.
They're asking online.
Oh, next time I will. Yeah, next time I will. So hyper-exclusivity. Now look, we point to Jesus exclusively, right? Acts 4:12. No other name given him in under heaven by which you may be saved. We're not pointing to our leader, our church, our little group. We're pointing to Jesus. And to be frank, the difference is that's true and theirs isn't. There's a group called the African Hebrew Israelites of Jerusalem. The African Hebrew Israelites of Jerusalem. They are based in Dimona, Israel. They left the south side of Chicago in the late 60s, ended up in Dimona, and now they're Hebrew Israelites who live in Israel. They believe their leader, Ben Ami, he's since passed away, is the prophesied Messiah. They believe Ben Ami is the Messiah. Whitney Houston, before she died, there's pictures you can see. She took a little tour and she visited Ben Ami and described him as a spiritual mentor. The Messiah. And there's videos where they introduce Ben Ami and call him His Holiness and all these titles. In fact, you know what? Let me just read real quick. Let me read here. I have a book by Ben Ami right here. Can I just read the intro, just a couple lines from this book to show you this is true? Because this group's cooler than the other groups. They're vegans, you know, they live among the Israelis, you know. But then you come to this, and this is the foreword written by one of his guys. So Ben Ami didn't write the part I'm about to read, but I just want to read this one thing. Page 4, right? Okay, I'm going to read right here. If the inhabitants of the earth ever desired or required truthful answers in a clear-cut direction, it is now. Certainly you've evaluated that the planet, with you in it naturally, is rapidly on its way out. Yet the solution, the salvation is at hand, literally. Now, listen, here's why I'm reading this. Listen to this. To say that deliverance rests in the words of this black man may be a bit more than most people could stand to hear. To say that this work is God sent would certainly be an understatement of the highest order. Let me interpret that for you. This man, Ben Ami, presents salvation directly from God. Deliverance is based upon his words. Most people can't stand to hear that. And if you say that this work is God sent, that's an understatement, not an overstatement. To say this is God sent is an understatement according to his follower. Do you see what I'm saying? So, and this is one of the groups. This is one of the groups. One's got the Apostle Paul reincarnated leading them. This one's got the Messiah leading them. Well, he's dead now. Nation of Yahweh that was down there in Miami, Florida, had a guy named Hulan Mitchell who named himself Yahweh ben Yahweh. God, son of God, is what that means. These are some of the leaders. Now, someone will say, well, those are just the ones who are off. There's kind of a lot that are off, though. ISUPK, they're right over there on 28th Avenue where that QT is in Cactus. You get off the freeway, turn left. I think it's 28th and Cactus. ISUPK stands for Israelite School of Universal Practical Knowledge. They have some of this similar kind of stuff where they've got this person that's reincarnated and that person that's reincarnated. I mean, and they say they're the home of the truth. That's their official slogan. And that Yahweh, that's their name for God, is not dealing with any other camp. So forget about Christians. They teach, ISUPK, right over there in 28th and Cactus, that God, Yahweh, is not even dealing with other Israelite groups. See what I'm saying? So, we got a problem. If you go to a church that's like that, get out of that church. Or come here, or no, the good churches in the valley. No, man. You won't hear this anywhere else. Even when people start saying this, I get a little worried. Wait, I won't hear. I wouldn't hear. If you were the Apostle Paul, I guess I could see you saying that. Because Paul got direct revelation from Jesus Christ, right? But he already said it, so if you repeat Paul, then I can hear it. What are you talking about, man? And I won't hear this anywhere else? You're the only one? Right? So this hyper-exclusivity is a thing. And it points to the inspired leaders or the inspired organization. The Christian Scientists, I don't know if you've ever heard of them. They're not really around. I'm not talking about the Scientologists. Different group, Christian Scientists. They can't change the order of their service all the way back from the 1900s because Mary Baker Eddy told them they had to do it a certain way and that her liturgy, her structure was divinely inspired. So they literally have to do it the same way. In every service, they read some of her words along with the Bible. I've been to some Christian Science service. I studied them for a while. Even the dead folks. And it's kind of a good thing for us because guess what? When they do that, it almost always results in that cult falling apart. It results in leadership problems when they center too much on the past person, right? To satisfy the dead person's ego. Hyper-exclusivity, extreme cognitive dissonance. What I mean by that is we all have issues in the Bible that we're like, I don't fully understand that. I need to come back to that. We even have issues where we're like, I don't know why this person did that or that, right? We're talking about extreme cognitive dissonance, meaning extreme contradictory things that you believe and hold. I'll give you an example. The old One West school taught that Jesus, whom they call Yahushai, and I'm talking about Hebrew Israelites again. A lot of my examples are Hebrew Israelites, not all, but I'm trying to designate, was coming back in the year 1999. And they even did a documentary by the BBC, that's a British broadcast, where they said multiple times, Jesus come back in 1999. They were on Montel. Jesus come back in 99. All in the 90s, these guys were saying, Jesus come back in 1999. I asked those guys about it because some were still alive and they were in the school when they were doing that. And some of those guys even did the false prophecy. They repeated it out on the streets and we have video, right? You said Jesus come back in 1999, yet you still have the title of prophet and apostle and elder? Aren't you a false prophet? Well, I went to Harlem one time and talk to some of these guys face to face. You can ask this. Or they'll say, Christians don't understand prophecy. Some of the Hebrew Israelites will say that. And I'll be like, you were part of the school that prophesied Jesus come back in 1999 and he didn't. Now, let me rewind again. Not all Hebrew Israelites believed in the 1999 prophecy /2000. That's a certain group called the One Westers. So even if they got a young guy who's in one of these One West groups, One West is a way to describe a broader umbrella of Hebrew Israelites, like IUIC out there in the corner. They may not know, but they should know that people who are taught still hold these men in high regard, some of who are dead. And back in the day, in the 90s, they were teaching 1999 prophecy. Now there's a new prophecy a lot of the Hebrew Israelites are getting into. What's that? It's the 400-year prophecy. They started trumpeting it up big in 2017. What do you think it was? 1619, when the first slaves came to what became the United States of America later. 1619 is when slaves were brought to Jamestown. 2019 is 400 years. Well, if we're the real Israelites, Genesis 15 says your people will be enslaved for 400 years. So at 2019, Jesus must come back or something because we're going to be free at the 400-year mark, right? So I debated a guy recently on this prophecy. I'm like, bro, it's 2022 and you're still putting out the 2019. And you know what he said? COVID. That was the fulfillment. That was the fulfillment because he's like, is it not true that everything changed? Look, I have a quote from President Biden saying everything changed. I was like, but that's not freedom from captivity that you're talking about. That's just bad stuff happening to the world. What are you talking about? And that's not even specific to America, which is supposed to be the land of your captivity. That's everybody. Yeah, but this is what you deal with. So that's what I mean by extreme cognitive dissonance. Also, a denial of hell, the doctrine of hell, sometimes abbreviated as ECT, which is eternal conscious torment. Yeah, Austin. Oh, Mikey, I didn't see you. The camera was in the way. My bad. Oh, yeah, purgatory, yeah. Well, Catholics believe in purgatory, which is the idea of purgatory that Roman Catholics believe is that if you're going to heaven, you first make a pit stop in purgatory where your sins are purged out. So guess who's paying for your sin? You. So purgatory is actually only for believers. So you only get to go to purgatory if you're on your way to heaven. It's a pit stop. And that's what an indulgence is. It knocks off years of purgatory. And that's what made Martin Luther mad. He saw the German monk Johann Tetzel selling pieces of paper to peasants saying, if you buy this, Uncle Joe gets 20 years off his purgatory sentence. And he's like, got upset about it. So when he wrote the 95 Thesis, he wrote a bunch of stuff against indulgences. That's what that's called. There's a good movie called Luther. I think it came out in 2006, 3, somewhere in between there. It stars Joseph Fiennes, I think. Really good movie. If you want to watch a great movie on the Reformation, it's just simply called Luther. There's one from 1953, but it's hard to watch that stuff for me. But yeah, that's a really good movie. So yeah, purgatory is that. Huh?
Or the, what's it called, where hell is optional or something? Not as optional, but it doesn't exist completely.
There's sometimes a position called annihilationism. Annihilationism is the idea that if you're judged negatively, God zaps you out of existence. You no longer exist anymore. You cease to exist. They believe you're annihilated. You're not here. They believe Christians go to heaven. People that believe in annihilationism. This is usually actually Christians that believe in this, by the way. Jehovah's Witnesses believe in it as well. But annihilationism is you zapped out of existence if you're not going to heaven. So heaven's forever and eternal, and you're eternally annihilated. Yeah, sure. It's like shaking up the Etch-a-Sketch, you know? Which is the original iPad, by the way. Another thing cults do is experience over doctrine. Direct revelations, visions, very common thing. In fact, if you've ever seen the Hebrew Israelites, they have a thing called the 12 tribes chart. Again, not all groups believe in the 12 tribes chart. Usually it's the guys on the corner that do. Yeah, don't say Ephraim or the Puerto Ricans, Levi or the Haitians. It's a whole thing where they associate some tribe of Israel with a modern people group, right? They have something for Cubans. They have this whole thing. Gadites are supposed to be Native Americans. They believe that came from a vision from an angel.
12 tribes of Israel, but it's compared to like the person's body. I heard of this some time ago.
I haven't. That sounds like Kabbalah, based on what you're saying. So Kabbalah is a medieval invention by Jewish folks where they took this hyper-mystical interpretation upon the Old Testament. And for a while it's still kind of popular, but a lot of celebrities got into it. Like, oh yeah, bracelet means Kabbalah. Like Britney Spears had one of those. It means Kabbalah. It's like this hyper mystical thing, but it's that sounds like that kind of thing. But but they say they can identify through characteristics who the 12 tribes of Israel are. Now again, this is only the guys on the corner with the signs. Israel of God is like, what do you mean? Mexicans aren't Israelites. It's just black folks. Don't tell them they're Issachar. They're not Issachar. You see what I'm saying? So if you don't hold to the 12 tribes chart, you have a more limited view of who can be an Israelite. What's up, bro? Oh yeah. I keep on forgetting. Well, they should have came. So direct revelations and visions and other things are unfounded claims of the miraculous. An end times fixation. That is a really common thing. Do you know how many times the Jehovah's Witnesses have predicted Jesus was coming back? The Mormons did it too. End times fixation is a thing. Some Christians got into that. 1988, 88 reasons why Jesus is coming back in 1988. Then it didn't happen. He rewrote the book, and I'm not joking. 89 reasons why Jesus is coming back in 1989. And this was a Christian guy, and this book was promoted, End times fixation, bad. A denial of the priesthood of all believers. So the priesthood of all believers there is no official priesthood. There's Christ, the high priest, he sat down. But now Peter describes us in 1 Peter 2 as royal priesthood. What's that mean? We can go directly to God because of Christ. And that also means, doesn't mean we don't have teachers, but it means hypothetically, a normal functioning adult should be able to read and understand the main message of the Bible. In fact, not just an adult, but a child. That's part of the priesthood of the believers. And it's not just the pastor that can pray. It's not just the pastor that can, no. Priesthood of the believers. That's denied a lot, as you can imagine. Why? Because that sort of democratizes Christianity, right? But they'll have, Hebrew Israelites, for example, they have priests. So they'll say, I'm a priest of this, I'm a priest of that. And one guy in one of the groups that meets every Saturday on Mill Avenue, Tempe, Rio Salado, the leader of this group says he's a part Haitian. And on the 12 tribes chart, if you're Haitian, you're a Levite. So he makes people pay him every month via Cash App because he's a Levitical priest. And in the Old Testament, you paid tithes to the Levites. You see what I'm saying? If you don't believe, I got a video. It's literally called "Pays Tithes to Himself," because they were like, "Well, yeah, but he also chips in." I'm like, "He pays tithes to himself?" Like, what? So now again, not every group. Remember the reason I'm telling you streets is because I'm telling you where the specific one, when I mentioned a specific one. But the reason why I'm doing that is to show you because we talked about a number of groups, but I focused on Hebrew Israelites, to show you that most of them got some bad doctrine, even the nice ones. Listen, if a Hebrew Israelite says to you, I'm going to pause here for a second, well, we have white people and brown people in our group. We're not hateful like some of those other groups. Don't be fooled by that. I'm not saying they don't, because some do. But the Jehovah's Witnesses are diverse. I've seen all kinds of Jehovah's Witnesses, haven't you? Mormons been getting diverse lately. I met a lot of Polynesian and Micronesian Mormons, Hispanic Mormons. Diversity is not a mark of orthodoxy. So don't be, they must not be that bad. Look at that redhead guy. What are you talking about? I'd rather, it's still a call, it's still aberrant, it's still wrong. So sometimes we got a low standard of what is, orthodox. We're like, okay, so we got to ask the questions about what the beliefs, the practices are, right? So picking back up, denial of priesthood of the believer, disregard for sound hermeneutics. Hermeneutics is the way you interpret and understand the Bible. Total disregard. If we have time at the end, we're going to really get into that. Syncretism, that means mixing and matching different religions. Reincarnation is an example of that. Reincarnation is nothing. It's something that hasn't even been, it's not even really part of the area that the Jews came out of. It's really a Far East idea, reincarnation, and yet now they're incorporating it into a religion they say is biblical. Often, yeah.
Can I ask a question about that?
Yes, you can.
So I could see how someone could use the Bible for reincarnation, not saying I believe it.
Yeah.
But when you look at Elijah and John the Baptist,
Right.
so they probably use that.
They do use
that. Okay.
They do use that. And it's important to remember when, remember John the Baptist, when they asked him, are you Elijah? He says, no. You know what the Hebrews like say that? He didn't know who he was. I'm like, well, wait, if he didn't know who he was, why did he say no? He should have said, I don't know. You see what I'm saying? He didn't say I don't. He said no. Now Jesus refers to John the Baptist as Elijah, but in another place he says came in the spirit and power of Elijah. So he explains what he means, because he's not literally saying that's Elijah. In fact, Elijah showed up on the Mount of Transfiguration. The disciples were able to know that was Elijah. They weren't like, hey, that looks just like I think, you know what I'm saying? It was Elijah. It wasn't John the Baptist. It was Elijah. But yeah, they do use that. On my YouTube channel, I do have a debate. If you type in reincarnation debate, I do have a debate on reincarnation with a Hispanic Hebrew Israelite on that topic. I think the debate went well. He's really respectful. It was a good debate. So the question about reincarnation there, everybody, as you could probably tell from the answer. Syncretism, involvement with the spiritism or a cult. They read themselves into the Bible. So it's almost like they see themselves in the center of the universe, so they see themselves constantly fulfilling prophecy. Joseph Smith literally did this. There's something called the Joseph Smith translation of the Bible. A lot of Mormons don't even know it exists because they tend to just use the KJV or the Book of Mormon. But he wrote something called the Inspired Version. And in Genesis 50, he put a prophecy about a man named Joseph in Genesis 50. I have a copy on my shelf. It literally says Joseph. It's talking. He put himself in the Bible because he was saying it got taken out. So he's saying he had to re-put it back in. So Joseph Smith literally wrote himself into the Bible. Now, if a Mormon is with you, they usually won't have that. They usually just have the KJV, because a lot of Mormons don't know about the Inspired Version. Or if you ask them about it, they say, yeah, we don't really use that. He wasn't done with it. But if you read his writings, he said he was done with it. But a lot of Mormons don't know that because they're taught to say he wasn't done with it. But it's like, well, even if it wasn't done, why was he writing himself in Genesis 50? That shouldn't have been in any version. If I was translating a Bible, I wouldn't accidentally slip in, and Vocab will teach on Wednesday night. Read themselves into the Bible, major on minor distinctives. I don't agree with everything he says or anything like that, so just when I mention a Christian doesn't mean I co-sign everything they say or do, but there's a local apologist from Phoenix named James White. He debated one of the leaders of one of these Hebrew Israelite groups, and in the debate, it was clear that the Hebrew Israelite leader did not do well. And so some of the other Hebrew Israelite groups attacked him for losing the debate, saying you're making us look bad. And one of the groups, in their review of the debate between James White and a guy named Elder Rakah, literally said it's because the group doesn't use the right name for Jesus. Because this group that was criticizing uses Yahushai, and the group that debated uses Yeshaya. Both of them are wrong, by the way. It's Yeshua in Hebrew. But they literally are saying one of the key reasons he lost the debate is because he had the wrong name. Now, what's my point? That's clearly an example of majoring on the minors. Can I give you one quick argument against that kind of stuff? Do you remember in Acts chapter 2? You have people from all over, it says. All over. I'm not talking about the upper room. I'm talking about all the people from all over, from Africa, from everywhere, right? They're there. And they heard, it says, them proclaiming the mysteries and wonders of God in their own language. Remember that? What that means, those Jews, those Galileans, those Hebrews, as they were speaking and somebody could hear whatever their language was, they were hearing that name for Jesus, that name for God, the one in their language. What's my point by that? The Holy Spirit inspired these Christians in Acts chapter 2 to speak in a variety of tongues in other people's language, and they said, we hear them proclaim mysteries of God in our language. People get more religious than God. Don't translate the name of God out of Hebrew. You got to keep it in Hebrew. Yahweh, which is not even right. Again, it's Yahweh, right? God's okay with translating his name. He did it in Acts chapter 2. We hear the mysteries of God in our own language, right? You see what I'm saying? Anyways, okay, continue. Now, those are common theological characteristics. Let's talk about some common sociological characteristics. And you'll probably recognize a lot of these. Authoritarianism. Do you know the ISUPK, a Hebrew Israelite group, again on 28th and Cactus? They can't call the man who leads them General Yohana only. Now, you may be like, dang, they got to call him General Yohana? That's like, I ain't calling my pastor General unless that's what his mama named him, right? General Yohana? They can't call him General Yohana. You're like, well, what do you mean, Vocab? Why can't they call him General Yohana? They have to say the commanding General Yohana. They can't just say General Yohana. That's not enough. So they say, look, I remember one time I was talking to a member of ISUPK, and I said, yeah, because he was debating me, and I was being a little naughty that day. I said, did General Yohana give you permission to be here? Right? He's like, you mean commanding General Yohana? I was like, oh, okay. You're kind of proving my point, bro, but okay. True story, right? You got a question in the back.
I want to know what would happen if they were to speak, not address them by that title.
Oh, well, I mean, I think it's just a matter of correct. Like, say you got a new guy, they're like, General Yohana, commanding General Yohana. I'm exaggerating a little bit. There's times where you'll see them calling him General Yohana. My point is, like, especially in their official documents, like YouTube, or when they type it out, they almost always got to put commanding General Yohana. And the more seasoned members know, you call him commanding General Yohana. I mean, you could be kicked out. This specific group, ISBK, they do what they say is like boot camp for it's called like Hebrew camp, and they make them run and do push-ups, and they go out in the park and they do jumping jacks, and they do weapons training. They do all this kind of stuff, and they have to wear all black and stuff like that. So like they get pretty serious. But I don't think someone doesn't say commanding General Yohana, they're kicking them out. But I'm just proving the point of the authoritarianism that you got going on there, right? See what I'm saying? Authoritarianism, psychological manipulation. I remember I saw a video by one of these groups, because some of these groups promote polygamy, that literally said, if you're a woman and you're not down with polygamy, you're a whore. That's psychological manipulation. Imagine the woman standing against polygamy being described as the whore. That seems backwards, right? But that's what I mean, psychological manipulation. There's a lot of that goes on with these groups. In fact, I know a guy who was in ISUPK, and he said that the upper leaders in ISUPK, a Hebrew Israelite group that we've been talking about, they're the ones who wear black studs, black leather and spikes and studs. They take a class called Psychology 101 when you're higher up. And my friend that's now a believer said it's basically they teach the leaders how to manipulate people. That's what the Psychology 101 class is. It's not like what you would take at a school. It's like how to manipulate people. Now, I had another ISP guy say, that's not true. That's a lie. But I don't know. That's what the former member said. Key thing is stripping of past associations, especially family. True story. I know a man in Virginia had a twin brother. They came into the school together, Hebrew school together, right? One became an atheist and left the school. His twin brother left. The other guy stayed in. This is in the days, I think, of MySpace. His twin brother remained his friend on MySpace. Isn't that a shocker? It's a twin brother. Just because he left the school, he didn't unfriend him, right? Leadership put out an edict saying you can't be friends with people who left the school. He didn't remove his twin brother. They approached him. He wouldn't do it. They kicked him out of the school because he would not remove on MySpace his twin brother as his friend because his friend was an atheist who left the school.
What happened?
That brother is not the atheist, but the other brother that left is an amazing Christian man who married an amazing Christian girl. And I've done some conferences with and is a beautiful spirit taking care of his family.
Just get them all kicked out.
Well, you pray, but then when you talk to them, you try to, and they're gonna. If one of them ever watches, if it goes, they're gonna say, "That's what I'm talking about. Vocab's the devil." You sow seeds of belief in Jesus and sow seeds of disbelief in their false doctrine. Sow seeds of belief in Jesus, but I work to try to sow seeds of disbelief. And guess what the best way to sow seeds of disbelief? Learn how to ask questions. You think you're clever? Be clever. Ask clever questions. Questions, you know what they do? They make the person think. Because if I say a question to you right now, for example, what does a question make you do? You just had to think to do that because I made it a question to you, right? So question versus just speech. I'm not saying there's never a time or place for speeches, but ask a question. That'll stick with that person, especially if you use it when you're applying the word of God. Rabid zealotry. So we want to be zealous for the Lord, right? But there's sort of a rabid zealotry that a lot of cultists end up with. And it's a shame because you have Jehovah's Witnesses knocking on your Saturday morning. They like to do bus-ups now. They're doing this for a lie. Meanwhile, Christians are in bed and we believe the truth, right? We're at Bedside Baptist with Pastor Pillow. And the Jehovah's Witnesses are out there knocking on the doors, right? We gotta do for the truth what they'll do for a lie. But you'll see that sometime. True communal lifestyle. Not all of them do this, but sometimes you'll see that in cultic groups, a tendency to, you come together, pool your resources. There's a group out in Tennessee that everyone has to put their paychecks in, and then the leadership redistributes the wealth. Now, they do it voluntarily, but it's what you have to do if you're really in the group. If you go out there, that's what you do. Paranoia, persecution complex. So, for example, I sometimes come against Hebrew Israelites as an apologist, as a Christian. It's something I specialize in. It's not just this guy disagrees with this. It's this guy is the devil. This guy is paid off by Jesuit priests in the Roman Catholic Church. This guy is secretly a Jew controlled by the banking families. Like, I'm not exaggerating. Like, it can't just be. So there's a persecution complex where it can't just be a disagreement. I'm being persecuted because you're not agreeing and it's some evil force. I'm like, can it just be I'm a Christian apologist and I don't agree? Right? I didn't agree with the Roman Catholics either, but they didn't tell me all this, Sometimes violence. You remember that, now I'm not saying this guy was a Hebrew Israelite, but you remember the guy, there was a rally in Wisconsin and he drove his car and hit all those people? This happened back, I think, in December. Does anyone know what I'm talking about? That guy was influenced by Hebrew Israelism because his social media was filled with it. Yeah, that happened in Wisconsin. Now, there's other examples, but I want to give real quick now an example to the next one. Let me look this one up. The next one is distorted sexuality. Distorted sexuality. I'm going to read a story real quick that just happened in Houston, and you'll see exactly what I'm saying. Oh boy. This is a man who claimed, this is from the Houston Chronicle, and this one's from Click to Houston. Man who claimed to be married to 14-year-old girl pleads guilty to aggravated sexual assault of a child. March 4th, 2022. Literally just happened, right? And you read the story about Stephen Carty. She was 13 at the time of their marriage, supposedly. And his defense was it's part of his culture because he's a Hebrew Israelite. And the weird thing was he was with the mom, too. So he was with the mom and the daughter. So the mom got in trouble, too, because it's considered endangering a child. Now, do all the Hebrew Israelites do that? No. But is that part of what some of them teach and believe? Yes. And he's not the only example. He's not the only example. Distorted sexuality. Antagonism towards Christianity. I'm going to say something that's going to be offensive, but it's because I'm telling you what's really going on. If you go on YouTube and you type in these words, remember, I'm prefacing by this is offensive, loudmouth, black woman, Christian. Most of the videos you find will be by Hebrew Israelites. Why is that? Their theory is the Christian church turns our women into disorderly whatever. And so they love to title their videos, loudmouth, obnoxious, black woman, da-da-da. So someone should pull some up right now. Tell me if I'm wrong. Especially if you type in Hebrew, forget about it. Then you're going to find plenty. But that's a common thing. That's a common thing. Or another one is Pastor Pork Chop. Pastor Pork Chop. Put in Pastor Pork Chop on Google with the words Hebrew, and you'll find a bunch of videos by Hebrew Israelites with an overweight pastor on the cover. They love calling the Christian church Pastor Pork Chop. Pastor Pork Chop, right? Because he doesn't want to leave Christianity because he wants to eat those ribs. That's really what they say. So when someone leaves their group and joins a Christian church, they're like, oh, Kevin, he just couldn't stand doing it without his pork rinds. That's what it really was all about. Opposed to independent thinking and a lot of times fraud and deception. Now, I'm not saying Lord knows we can find fraud and deception by Christians, but it's not supposed to be that way. But it's much more, I think, endemic when it comes to Hebrew Israelites. Here's a guy named Tazadakia. He's dead now. He got COVID. Who called himself the Comforter. He said he was the Holy Spirit made manifest. And what do you find in? Yeah. He calls himself the Comforter. And Tazadakia, he milked the Israelite Church of God in Jesus Christ for millions of dollars before he died. And this is the Daily News. This is from New York. I had a friend from New York send this to me, and you can read all about it. So they're smaller than the Christian church, but there's a overabundance of stuff like that still happens within their ranks. Now, we know Christians can abuse, but we would say that you ain't walking like a Christian. Either you're not a Christian or you made a serious sin and need to repent, right? 1 Timothy talks about that, 1 Timothy 6, right? And so that's something you see a lot too. Now, look, I have some more stuff. I have a little bit about why people join cults and organizations, and I have a little bit more about how cults interpret Scripture. But I'm going to stop right there because I want to make sure we have enough time for questions. I think that's probably where I need to stop to make sure we've got a more open Q&A. So as we end this part where now think of your questions, let's have a conversation. What I wanted to try to do tonight is show you the relationship between cults, Christianity, with numerous examples of cults, especially focusing on the group I know the most about, which is the Hebrew Israelites. But we gave some other examples, but I'm trying to put it within a larger framework about this, because essentially a cult is unhealthy, and we see a lot of unhealthiness in a lot of the groups I mentioned. Doesn't mean there's not nice people, doesn't mean any of that, but it just means that we should take these errors seriously. That's the payoff. So let's stop with that, and I will do better to repeat the questions now. Oh, you got the audio? Well, I'll still do my best. So let's talk, guys. Let's talk. What do we want to ask about? What do we want to talk about?
Part two.
I don't know. Let's talk about it. Let's see.
What would make a Muslim or Christian turn to Hebrew Israelite?
Good question. That's a good question. What would make a Muslim or a Christian turn to Hebrew Israelite faith instead? Well, let's say that you're at a Christian church, but maybe it's not a very healthy or good church. So you have a general respect for the Bible, but you also have a lot of questions and you don't feel like it's getting answered. And so you're in this place, and this is where your family goes. Then you're out and about Saturday at Zia Records, and you come out on 19th Avenue, Camelback, and you hear some guys on a microphone with the Bible, and they look like you. They're not old men with rings and suits on. They look like you, and they're bold in their proclamation, and they're flipping around that Bible, and they're quoting that Bible, and they're saying some verses you never heard before, and then they tell you you're an Israelite and they can prove it from the Bible. You've never seen anything like this. It's very seductive to be told you're a chosen race based upon your ethnicity, not based upon anything else, mixed with the fact that you're seeing a confidence and things like that you may not have seen if you come out of a poor church. When I say poor, I mean an unhealthy church. I don't mean in finances at all, because you can have lots of money and be Scottsdale and be a poor church, spiritually speaking. Now, that's not to say every Christian who joins up didn't know anything or came out of an unhealthy church. The majority, I think that is the case. There are Christians, though, that I've known that have been in this thing for a long time and even know something who still end up joining because the pool is still strong. So you feel like people got away with what they did in slavery. You feel like they got away with it. There's no justice. You feel like there's not a good explanation why God let that happen. Hebrew Israelites say they can answer both those things. The one Westers say those white people in the future will be our slaves. And God did it because we weren't keeping the law, statutes, and commandments. So guess what you need to do? Recognize you're an Israelite. Start keeping this law. Grow your beard. Wear your fringes. You're a woman. Put on that skirt. Cover your hair. Don't be working on Saturday unless you're out in the corner yelling at people. Then it's okay. I'm being facetious there because it's odd that they say it's a Sabbath, yet they're out there carrying sound equipment. And don't eat pork, da-da-da-da. So there's an element of the confidence a lot of times, and if you've only seen kind of the same sermon 500 times about God, this is your year, and then you see someone actually saying, look, you're in the Bible, what? Plus answering questions you haven't heard discussed that are important to you can be very appealing. With a Muslim, sometimes a Muslim finds out that Islam is kind of racist. Muhammad owned black slaves. Muhammad called Ethiopians raisin heads. One of his key teachers after him said, if you ever describe Muhammad as a black man, you should be killed. Muhammad said he had a dream about Satan, and in the dream he said Satan looks like a black man. If you find that out, you're like, maybe Islam's maybe not the religion for me. So sometimes that happens. But there could be a variety of reasons, about that as well. But someone else had their hand up. Hopefully that gave you some insight into it. If you ask them, they'll say, well, I realized I was the people of the book. And it's art. They'll go, archaeology, history, this Bible, science, all proves it. It's obvious. Yeah.
Like there's a huge, in a lot of the Christian churches and stuff, a huge lack of discipleship. And so they immediately get that discipleship.
Yeah, lack of discipleship is a problem, right? Discipleship's not fun. No cameras on. You're just there spending time with another Christian, right? So sometimes discipleship gets left in the dust because it's not very romantic, right? Although it's the basic thing what Christians are supposed to do, be disciple as others, right? But sometimes it gets neglected. And it's hard work, right? Discipleship, it's hard. It's got to be intentional. So you can be improperly discipled, and that's what I would say has happened with these groups. But, all of a sudden you see men who are strong, they're older a lot of times, some of the leaders, and they take you under the wing, and they're like, hey, listen, you come Saturday, you come with a Bible, you come with a pad, and you come with a pen, and you're going to be here from this time to that time. They're not asking you. They're telling you this is how you're going to spend your Saturday. People think that turns off people. Actually, men love a challenge. They like to be called to a higher standard. Now, there's people who can't hack it, but a guy who's never had anything expected out of him, no one expected anything, so they never put any kind of standard on him. Plus, he was called names, treated like crap, racism, all that. Then a guy says, you're an Israelite, you're going to do this. You just might be into that. That might be appealing. Men don't like to sit around. It gets there, they sit around and do nothing and they want to work and learn, and and a man challenging that can be very appealing. And I hate to say this, but my goodness, sometimes the Christian church needs to take some lessons from the cults. I don't mean manipulation and sensory deprivation, but some of the other things, So, but yeah, that's a real issue. So the real issue of this is proactive on the Christian side. We're doing this over here. It needs to happen. But it's really proactive, teaching history, talking about the problem of evil. Even things like this, I believe in things like this. Like you talk about the African church, you talk about Black Christians. You that's part of what you talk about, right? You answer the question: is Christianity the white man's religion? The proactive side, but there's also the reactive side because we got to do this too. But this is really where it's at. Now look, we'll always lose people. Judas left Jesus, right? It wasn't because someone told him he was an Israelite. He already knew that. But it was for money and some other stuff. By the way, Hebrew Israelites, they believe that if you're an Israelite, you're going to be in the kingdom no matter what. So I had a Hebrew Israelite be like, you telling me someone can murder, do this, and then turn to Jesus and they'll be saved? I'd be like, yeah, through the grace of Christ. You believe that someone could betray Jesus Christ and still be in the kingdom without repenting? And he's like, yeah. So Judas is going to be in heaven. You have a problem with a murderer who repents, but Judas... They're like, well, he did repent. He committed suicide. No, that's worldly sorrow the Bible talks about. That's not true repentance. Peter repented, not Judas. And then forget, you can give all kinds of examples. King Ahab, he's going to be in the kingdom too. So I get to go to heaven with King Ahab and Judas and me. Anyways, okay, great question. Who else got something? Now, Austin, what's up?
So you said a group, or at least one specific one. You said they believe, like you said, that one guy was with a mom and a daughter.
The story from Houston of Stephen Carty. You can look this up. It's literally a brand new story. Put in Stephen Carty, Houston. He was with the mom and then also with the daughter. So some are polygamous. Some of them are.
So how would somebody like that interpret Leviticus 20 and 14?
I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know. But we have seen some stuff like that happen. But I mean, there's another case. A guy named Peter. I mean, this is a crazy story. If you want to look up something, let me make sure I got the name right. In Carolina, this is from a while ago. Yeah, woo! This is a bad story. It's either Peter David or Peter Moses, but he left one of the Hebrew Israelite camps and basically started a cult in his house, and he had all the women, and he demanded that they put in their phone for his name Lord. So whenever he called them, it said "My Lord" on it, and this is multiple women. He had like 4 in the house, and the reason why he got in trouble is because the 5-year-old boy, they were worried that he was gay. The 5-year-old boy, that he was not masculine enough, and so Peter came and shot him and killed him, and then made the mom bury him because you gotta kill the homosexual according to the Old Testament is the way he's interpreting it. But the kid's 5, so he's just not masculine. And then later on, he killed the mom, too. So that's how the authorities found him. This has happened in Carolina. Now, someone's going to say, oh, those are exceptions. Yeah, but notice how they base it upon their religious interpretation of the Scripture. So, you know what I'm saying? So, yes, those are exceptions, but still, come on now. Say what? Yeah. Now, if you're out there with these guys, they're like, oh, don't listen about all that. But I think it's important. Let me just go ahead and lay it on you. MLK Jr., his mother, died. How? Anybody ever know that? In Atlanta, Georgia, a Hebrew Israelite came in the church, Ebenezer, was looking for dad, couldn't find him, shot her while she's playing the organ. His name is Marcus Chenault. Look it up. Hebrew Israelite. Why did he do it? Because the pastors are leading the people astray, not telling them they're Israelites, hiding the truth from them. So Marcus Chenault came and killed MLK Jr.'s mother. Look up MarcusChenault. So this has been going on for a while. It's just growing bigger now. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
What do you think about, because some people attribute some of that false doctrine to witchcraft. Because in Galatians it says, who bewitched you?
Right.
And so not that all of it comes from that, but I've heard some people talk about how, somewhere along the lines there's some type of a hidden influence.
Well, behind idols, Paul says we're demons. And I don't think you have to have an idol, like sitting there to be engaged in idolatry. So ultimately, it does come from Satan as the father of lies, but I think there's sort of greater or lesser examples. You know, Satan's not omnipresent, so he's with one at a time. Same thing with the demons. But, you know, I do think in certain cases, now I don't know which one's which all the time, but you see some of that, and it seems like that has to be the case. I mean, for example, let me just... Let me read you something. I think this is an example of something I see that I think is demonic. Now, before I read this, ask yourself, do you know anyone in your life that you can think of who would fantasize about having human trophies of people they've killed in their house? Just think about that for a second. Do you know anybody? You're like, that seems demonic, right? Or something out of some kind of horror movie, right? Well, just this Tuesday, I got a message from Yamel Israel where he tagged me, and I'm going to read this to you because I think, and I looked up his profile. He's a young guy, probably only 20 years old. So I do think there's a demonic influence because this is considered normal with some of these guys. Hey, Hebrew family, when God give us the green light on these heathen nations, I call dibs on Vocab Malone. Bad enough, but let's listen to the rest. I'm going to hang him up on my wall as a decoration. It's going to be a day in hell for these damn demons who have turned himself into a full-time scoffer against us. Soon he going to be decorations and ornaments. Don't pay this man no mind. That was the nicest part of the message. I haven't rechecked the message, but I can go back and check. And the thing is, that doesn't really get called out. It's like it's a lot more normal than you thought. I remember one guy said, if you have a daughter, I'm going to kidnap her and rape her to death. I was like, bro, it's messed up. Like, kidnapping's bad enough, but raping's worse. But why rape to death? Like, it's like so twisted, right? You know what I mean? I can't make that up. You know, I can't even. But
they hear themselves talk like that.
Yeah. And
they don't even check each other on this crazy talk.
Or if someone is like a little more friendly, they'll be like, you got to understand, our people been through a lot of trauma. They'll excuse it, you know? Every now and then someone will condemn it, but I got to tell you, it's the minority, man. Yeah, it's the minority. It's rare that I see a guy be like, hey, usually it's LOL, LOL. You know? Yes, sir.
One of the viewers asked, is Islam inspired by Christianity?
Is Islam inspired by Christianity? Well, there are some Christian apologists who specialize in Islam that describe Islam as a cult of Christianity. And the reason is because Muhammad got a lot of stuff from Christians he knew in the Arabian Peninsula and utilized a lot of Christian stuff for his own religion. And some of the early Christian apologists who dealt with Muslims back then described Islam as like a sect, an aberrant sect of Christianity. Now, the thing is, maybe in the beginning you could look at it that way, but Islam has reached the threshold of what we would understand to be a world religion. Like, you can call anything a cult, but cult sort of has a specific definition. And so I just understand it to be a false world religion. Now, Islam has its own cults, like the Nation of Islam, the 5 Percenters, the Ahmadiyas. There's different groups. So I've heard people say that, and it's true there's an influence. For example, read Surah 5 that's in the Quran. It's got Jesus talking from the cradle. He's talking as a baby. And there's another part in the Quran where Allah is like, hey, Jesus. I'm paraphrasing, okay? But this is in the Quran. Hey, Jesus, I didn't ever tell anyone to worship you, did I? Jesus is like, nah, man, you didn't tell anyone to worship me or my mom. So I don't know why they're doing that. I mean, I could zap you out in an instant and you wouldn't exist anymore. I know it's true. I'm just a faithful slave of Allah. So Jesus is literally in the Quran saying, don't worship me, right? And I could be zapped out of existence by Allah, who I'm merely a slave. So it's a way to use Christian elements to distort and upturn Christianity ultimately. But that's it right in the Quran. That's not even the Hadith. That's in the Quran itself, the stuff I was telling you now. But, yeah. But, yeah, it's just a world religion at this point, I think. Those are good questions. What time do you guys normally end? Is it now the time? Yeah, I think it is. I think you tell me an hour and a half, 2 hours, and I think we're right there. So listen, I didn't get to go through all these books. I'm not giving these away or anything, but I have brought some interesting stuff. I'm just going to let you guys see these if you're interested. Don't worry, I'll pick it up later. Don't worry. What I want to do is I just want to show you some Hebrew Israelite books. These here, could you maybe give one to everyone and pass them around? I want these back. I want to show you their literature firsthand. So take a look at it. So each person take a look at different ones. These are different Hebrew Israelite materials. I want you to see some of their stuff for themselves. They're from different spectrums. One book is literally titled, Jesus is not God. Another one's called Jesus is black and the earth is flat. So you get a sense of some of these, and some of them are children's books as well. Oh, you got the children's book, yeah. Yeah, you got the Israelite children's activity book. And so I want to give you a sense of this kind of stuff because you might be out if you go. Anyone ever go to MLK Day festivities? Well, I do. I haven't been out in a while, but you're going to see him out there. You're going to see him out there. Juneteenth celebrations, you're going to see some Hebrew Israelites. Almost 9 times out of 10 these days. Glendale Glitters, you're going to see him out there. State Fair, Arizona State Fair, not every night, but lots of nights, you're going to see him out there. You go by 19th Avenue in Camelback on a Saturday, you're going to see him out there. 19th Avenue in Dunlap, you see him out there. 27th Avenue in Ennisco, you see him out there. 51st in McDowell, you see him out there. They don't go out 44th Street and Thomas as much, but they used to back in the day. Tempe, Mill Avenue, Rio Salado, you see him out there. My point is, this is a real thing. It's a growing thing. Nation of Islam, Farrakhan's, he's very old. They're not the powerhouse they once were. This is kind of the thing we got to really start dealing with now for our generation because it's not going away anytime soon. Lecrae, a Christian rapper, saw them preaching at the Super Bowl. He doesn't co-sign their message, but he kind of made it seem like he does. He said to the Hebrew Israelite camp out at the Super Bowl, I appreciate y'all representing. I think in his mind he was just showing them love as men in the struggle. But right before he said that, they were talking about the earth is going to be ruled by black and Hispanics, and Jesus is going to squash your brains out through your cranium. So he shouldn't have co-signed them in any way. I don't think he's saying he's a Hebrew, but, it's probably not the best thing to say to those guys. I appreciate y'all representing. But he did. But, that was... Andy Mineo was accosted by Hebrew Israelites in Kansas City, and he gave a much better answer. Not that I don't have my disagreements with Andy Mineo, different Christian rapper. I did a video on this. It's called "Is Andy Mineo a Hebrew Israelite?" Because some of them believe he's an Israelite because he's got flavor. I'm not kidding you, by the way. And he's Sicilian on his dad's side. See, I'm a Sicilian on my mom's side, so they say I'm not an Israelite. It has to be on her dad's side. If you're Sicilian on your dad's side, you might be, and he is. So, anyways, they said, "Hey, Andy, come over here. Don't you want to learn the Bible?" And he said, "Not from you." That's a much better answer. Not from you. All right.
It's a lot of information. We still online. We still online. Real quick, hold on. Hey, we still online. We're not done yet. Give me a second. Yeah. That's why it's talking like. For those, because there's people online watching, so I'm gonna close out with them. Run my outro. Is my outro working?